Dr. Balboni, thank you so much for joining Contagion today.
Great. Thanks for having me, Grant.
You're quite welcome. Just to start, could you tell our viewers who aren't familiar what Appili Therapeutics is all about?
Sure. So, Appili Therapeutics was a company started in 2015 with a very specific mission to tackle infectious disease problems in a way that I thought nobody else was. That we effectively match up high unmet medical need to solutions in a way that hopefully across the entire portfolio allows us to answer really difficult questions. And we've done that by addressing infectious disease needs with antifungals, antibiotics, and now an antiviral program. And I have to say, if there's one hallmark of how we do things, and basically driven by what was going on in the markets in 2015, is that we strive to be a socially conscious biotechnology company. And I know people roll their eyes when they hear that, but I think you take a look at our portfolio and you recognize that we're going after high unmet need in ways that are very creative. And then finally, we're a virtual company. We're agnostic to geography. We're agnostic to scientific platform. And so I think that allows us the flexibility to really go after intractable and really difficult to treat diseases in a way that's both good for the company and our shareholders, and it allows us to do well as a company as well. So it's a do good, do well philosophy.
Well, actually, that just made me think. How do you? Because it really raises an interesting question with the kind of the ethics of things in that. How do you navigate some of the incentives in the infectious disease market, I guess would be how I would put it.
Yeah.
You probably know what I mean.
I do. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so we have a purposefully built portfolio that leverages both the push incentives in the form of non-dilutive capital. We of the money we've raised so far, fully half of that has been with government partners and nonprofits, helping us to absorb some of the cost of bringing these drugs to market. And then you'll also take a look at our portfolio, and we have the antifungal, for example, in cryptococcal meningitis, or our 1701 tularemia, weaponized tularemia vaccine, will leverage those pull incentives that you're talking about, the priority review vouchers and the potential for stockpiling. And so when you take those two together, it allows us to spread the risk and help share the burden or load across the entire portfolio, and really go after things that companies, if they were doing it as a one-off, probably wouldn't be able to afford to do. And so it's a purposely built model to do that.
So now that you've told us a bit about the company, what is your own background and what got you started an interest in infectious diseases and research and bringing it to this form?
Yeah, so I think it's a two-part answer. The first is by way of academic training. I did I was in the MD PhD program at the Icahn School of Medicine, Mount Sinai in New York, where there's a strong socially conscious thread that runs through the program. They send you out from the very first day in medical school to work with patients, and I did that in the long-term care facility on the west side. But then I would go back at the end of the day and conduct research in upper respiratory tract biology, and seeing folks like Peter Palese, Dr. Peter Palese, and Adolfo Garcia-Sars, who are working on the 1918 pandemic flu, working in that world. And so world-class research with patient care, kind of the bench to bedside approach, absolutely informed my desire to give back as a scientist and a researcher. The second part is I have at this point more than 17 years of time as an officer in the U.S. Army, and so that work was conducted in a number of places, including at USAMRIID, the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Disease in Maryland. I did work in 2014 at the FDA as a DoD fellow, as a clinical researcher. And I got my first look at remdesivir and favipiravir as part of that effort for the Ebola outbreak. I was head of deputy director of clinical and regulatory affairs for DoD, helping to run 110 clinical trials around the world for things like HIV vaccine and freeze-dried plasma, and things that were really off of the mainstream radar for biotechs and pharma. And it absolutely informed my desire to keep working in that space. So I think it's really both by virtue of training and real world experience that I saw there was a path forward for these products. And then finally, we have a very strong infectious disease team, including the CMO out of Boston, Dr. Yoav Golan, Stefan Paquette, our PhD in virology. I mean, really, really smart folks within our company, to name just two of many. So lots of smart people at many points in my career that have kind of pushed me in this direction.
That's a great story. So can you tell us about the phase 2 study with Favipiravir?
Yeah. So Favipiravir, or Avigan.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
And Avigan might be easier since that's the Japanese trade name for the drug. That's where this came from. The drug is actually approved in Japan for pandemic flu. It's also recently approved in China for COVID-19, it's a generic drug, meaning it's off patent for the drug itself in most jurisdictions. And there are a couple of companies that are working very hard to bring it forward. We have a relationship with Fujifilm Toyama, the innovator of this drug, and we are working to bring a phase 2 study to Canada, specifically looking at outbreak control. And so one of the things that's really important about this drug is getting it on board early, and we'll talk maybe a little bit more about that later. But we thought that if you could prevent or slow down outbreak in particularly high-risk patients, in this case, residents of long-term care facilities, the elderly, that is a great way to really make a difference. And so this is a cluster randomized placebo-controlled trial to look at the ability of the drug to prevent or stop outbreak, have outbreak control. And then a secondary endpoint is progression of disease. So those that do get infected as part of an outbreak, we're hoping to stop them from going to the hospital or progressing on and dying from the disease. And so it's about getting the drug on board early and allowing the mechanism of action, which is well understood for this drug, to have an effect. With vaccines, probably, at the earliest, maybe the end of this year, if you believe Oxford. I think they're working very hard to do that, but maybe a year or more away. We need therapeutic interventions, and as we've seen with remdesivir, a drug acts in a very similar way, it's really important. Once we have a vaccine, we also thought that this phase 2 study in long-term care was important because the elderly and immunocompromised will probably not respond to a vaccine in the same way that everyone else does. And so outbreak control becomes very, very, very important. And so we believe that this phase 2 study has the possibility, as a randomized controlled trial, to really show a differentiator for this product. And we are the only trial that I'm aware of right now that's actually attacking this population, special population.
I'm curious what the support for the trial looks like in terms of funding and is there any kind of public-private partnerships involved or anything like that?
Great question. Yeah, great question. And so certainly, as you probably surmised from my talk before and your question about the incentives, we are continuing to work. First of all, Fujifilm donated the drug for this specific trial, and I think that's incredibly important to understand that they similarly feel that this is a very important trial to run. We're in discussions now with the public funders who also have expressed great interest in this trial and are moving forward with that. So I expect that we will be able to announce that kind of public-private partnership with respect to the funding moving forward. But even absent that, I think this is so important that we get this moving quickly, that we as a company are doing this effectively, at risk. And so I think, while I'm confident the government will step up and work with us, I think this is such an important question. We've got to continue to move it forward.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt, but it just
Yeah.
even mentioning the word risk, I think what's really from a different context of the word, what's really interesting about this is that it's one of the first therapeutics I've heard of that could be part of a pandemic response strategy that is, targeted, basically. I mean, the fact that you're looking at it specifically for outbreak control, clusters of cases, that sort of thing. I mean, am I right to say that this is a kind of not that it couldn't be used for the general population as a drug itself, but that you're looking at this from a more targeted, I guess I'll use the
Yeah.
word again, perspective?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think if you were to query a number of ID physicians and researchers and specialists, I think everybody would agree that if you can prevent the disease, that's really where you want to be, right? I mean, it's better than treating, and so there are, of course, risks and benefits with that approach, but I think that's a good place to start. And I think you need only look at Tamiflu or also Tamivir, and that's used prophylactically to try and treat influenza. So this approach has been tried certainly before, and so we're not blazing a new path in any respect with that. And as a matter of fact, we borrow very heavily on the design of the trial in order to leverage the work that's been done previously. But to your point, I think there's also qualities of this drug that suggest that this is the right population to go after as well. And so I think it's worth mentioning that one of the concerns with this drug is that it will likely have a black box warning in the U.S. with respect to its potential to act as a mutagen, and so or teratogen. And so you probably don't want to give this to kids or to pregnant women without a serious reason to do so. And so when you're going earlier, of course, the risk-benefit balance is a little bit different. I think it's particularly well suited for COVID-19 or coronavirus and these upper respiratory tract viruses that are in the elderly. And so I think this is really fitting the properties of the drug to its intended use in the same way that they're doing with remdesivir, which is IV, by the way, and not oral.
And this is oral administration, right?
It is. This is a tablet. And so I think this is particularly well suited to the long-term care facility, where you probably don't want to engage in IV therapy just based on the nursing support or even the ability to do it. And so I think, again, tailoring, as you said, or targeting the drug to a special population is something that I think folks spend a lot of time thinking about it. And in this case, we've spent time thinking about what that special population would be, and we believe that's the long-term care facilities.
That's great. And I mean, what we've seen in terms of thus far the COVID-19 statistics on that, I mean, it's tragic. It's almost hard to fathom, how large a share of the mortality and morbidity has come from, the outbreaks there, and that's definitely a good place to look. I mean, just to get into the weeds a little bit, though, could you elaborate? You started to touch on this, but on how the drug works.
Yeah, this drug has been around for a while, and again, the innovators at Fujifilm Toyama and Furuta et al. For the papers that are out there, folks who are interested in looking at them, talk a lot about the mechanism of action of this drug, and effectively, what this drug does is it targets a specific protein, an RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, in a way that's similar to how remdesivir works. It actually targets that protein within the cell, which is critical for the final maturation, assembly, and secretion of the viral particle. And so what it does is the virus gains entry into the cell. It then processes the nuclear material, but then it incorporates and uses other proteins, of course, to cue the cellular machinery in order to make viable, mature viral particles. So in contrast to some other drugs which may prevent the entry of the viral particle to the cell by targeting things like the ACE2 receptor or an IVIG, for example, targeting cell surface receptors or even a neutralizing antibody, which would prevent the virus from getting into a cell, the virus gets in. Once it gets in, the drug is processed It's actually ribosylated and phosphorylated, for those that care, to make an active drug which prevents the assembly and the ability of the virus to reassemble and package the viral particles and secrete it. And so it works by targeting, again, that RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, which very importantly is a highly stable, evolutionarily conserved molecule, which means that it's probably unlikely to mutate in a way that you could get with a spike protein or a surface protein, for example, which is how most of the viruses mutate. So the virus basically cannot replicate. And so that's why it's important to get it on board early. You get this you get the viral virus into some cells, but you prevent it from being able to infect other cells, for example. And so I think in a way that's quite analogous to how remdesivir works, targeting the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, or the RDRP machinery, and preventing polypeptide elongation. That remdesivir works clinically, gives us some hope that this approach is actually, the mechanistic approach of targeting this protein is actually a good way to go. And so I think it's an important process.
And do we have any preliminary evidence from, the approval in China, for example? Is there anything there?
Yeah, so I think there are two ways to look at this. One is, unlike remdesivir, this drug has been exposed. A lot of people have been exposed to this drug, and so safety and efficacy are obviously our targets, right? And so there have been a number of trials run, including 3 phase 3s in the U.S. for influenza, which is the condition it's approved for in pandemic flu in Japan. There have been hundreds of people exposed to this drug already, so we know that it's safe. The safety profile is quite good. There are trials that suggest, with data that suggests its potential efficacy in treating COVID-19. And I would point to 2 Chinese trials, one that recruited 80 patients that were treated with Favipiravir, and they exhibited substantially shorter median viral clearance times of 4 days versus 11 days with the untreated controls. In another randomized study of 240 COVID-19 patients, they were treated, and they demonstrated a clinical recovery rate of 7 days versus 14 days, which is kind of the normal for folks. And so that was an increase of almost 56%, 55.9% to 71.4%.
I mean, that's not very different from, the trickle of remdesivir results we heard that Fauci gave that headline of standard of care for,
Absolutely. Yeah. And in the absence of other drugs that are available in the tablet form, the oral form, I think that we're seeing very comparable results in, I might add, patients who are a little bit later in the course of the disease than we're hoping to get. And so I think that the results might be better even as we get earlier and earlier with the use of this drug.
I'm actually curious, in comparison to remdesivir, what's the global stockpile of this look like? I mean, you mentioned this is already used for things like influenza in some places.
Yeah, so there are, again, this is a generic or effectively a generic drug, right? I mean, it's off patent. Let's put it that way. It's an off patent drug. Generic is a specific term of art in an area, but it's off patent, which means that a number of people are manufacturing it. There are 3 major manufacturers right now, and 4th if you consider some recent data. So Fujifilm Toyama, as we mentioned, is the innovator, and they have been making this drug as part of the stockpiling plan in Japan for both the pandemic flu and then now for COVID-19. There is a company in China which licensed the manufacturing technology from Japan a number of years ago now, which is Haisun Pharmaceuticals, and they ran 2 clinical trials in China and are now making product. And then there's a company in India called Glenmark, which is part of the consortia of companies that are making it. And now there's a Russian entry as well. Interestingly, if this drug works, I predict, much like remdesivir, that no single country is going to be able to meet the worldwide demand for this drug for some time. And so it's a small molecule, it's a tablet, it's relatively straightforward to make, but it does take time to ramp up and have a process validation and quality control to make this tablet. And so I think countries are looking to supply their own needs first. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that Japan and Prime Minister Abe has said that they would make Favipiravir available to any country that asks for it. And they have started to do that, but the numbers that we're seeing, the numbers that they can supply, we're looking at tens of patients. And so, I think that's why the donation of the drug from Fujifilm to Appili is so meaningful. We have enough to run our phase 2 trial with a few hundred patients. We have more product available now than countries will have for some time. And so I think we have the opportunity and the responsibility, frankly, to work, as you said before, as part of a public-private partnership. And we are working with government sources. We're working with, we haven't announced it yet, but it will certainly be announced soon who the clinical partner is in Canada. Again, this is a public-private partnership. And so we are really tasked with, as far as I'm concerned, and we have the responsibility to ensure that this gets out in a way that supports randomized controlled trials with both private and public partners. And so that's what we're doing. But to your question, I think it's going to be some time, if this proves that it works, before manufacturing can ramp up to the level that the rest of the world will need.
And do you expect that if you're seeing good feedback from the trial, that, I mean, I imagine there would be a sort of sudden interest in, some of the Canadian government agencies you're working with, for example, like really investing in this?
I think so, and I think I'll speculate a little bit, because I think that's all I can do at this point. We've been so focused on getting the drug into Canada, which it is now, in place to start a trial. As soon as we get the no objection letter from Health Canada, they're reviewing the file. I expect that in the next week or so, and then we would have first patients dosed probably by the end of the month. I mean, I think we're really moving quickly on this. And so I do believe that if it shows efficacy, and we expect results, and as soon as we could have them in 3 months. I mean, I think that's really looking at this optimistically. But I do believe that the government partners would have significant interest in deciding how they would want to move this forward at that point. And so we're continuing those discussions with those government partners, potentially.
Yeah, and I think when we're thinking about the financial nitty-gritty of this, I think it would be worth remembering, for that we don't know when a vaccine is coming, and that your earlier point as well about the immunocompromised and elderly populations may not be able to have the same uptake of vaccine as the general public. And so that ramp up issue to me, I mean, I'm no economist, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that ramp up issue to me sounds like something that a lot of the therapeutics we're investigating are looking at here. I mean, I think there was a hope that hydroxychloroquine would, because of the existing stockpile, would be, I mean, we still don't know.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
But yeah, so that's kind of that's an interesting component, because I actually don't think that's in a very much different boat than a lot of the investigational drugs here.
Yeah, I agree. And by the way, it's worth noting that one of the arms of our study is going to include hydroxychloroquine to also help bring more data to light on whether or not hydroxychloroquine works. It's been rather disappointing so far.
Yeah.
But I think there are still questions that we need to answer, and so we're also helping with that, again, with a donated drug.
Yeah, I mean, and there's stuff about, I'm not an expert on this, but there is stuff about the pharmacokinetics, I think is the word, of hydroxychloroquine, that despite the results we're seeing, like, it's almost like, why not, with some of the ways the drug works. So it'd be interesting to see if there's some adjustment that could be made to it to sort of salvage it. But I mean, I think you're right that so far we're not seeing what we wanted with that. So it's good to have more data coming.
So I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a second, because I think you raised a really important point, and so it goes back to my time at FDA when we were looking at Favipiravir and remdesivir, and it's certainly not my issue, but I'm a convert, if you will. I think in in the well-intentioned zeal to make drugs available during the Ebola outbreak, there was a lot of emergency use, and I think it's an important component of getting drugs out to the public. It's in fact how remdesivir is working now. However, it doesn't obviate the need to do randomized controlled, placebo-controlled randomized trials. So the RCTs are really important, and we missed an opportunity, I believe, with Ebola to do that. And so I am a very strong supporter, as is Appili, with being part of this solution, asking the right questions, running the trials, and this cluster randomized controlled trial that we're running is in fact incredibly important. And so I think we should not miss another opportunity to answer questions along the lines of what you're saying. Do these drugs work so that they're available the next time, right? I mean, if we missed an opportunity, we forgot about this, and these drugs kind of languished. And hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir, favipiravir, all kind of sat around until the next time, and then we scrambled to try and do something. And as you've seen with hydroxychloroquine, there are serious risks associated with that drug. And so I think we owe it as a community to run the trials, ask the hard questions, and maybe take a moment to pause and let the politicians do what they're going to do. But we need to continue to ask the right questions and run the right trials. So that's my soapbox issue. But I think folks have kind of jumped on board with this, and that's certainly what we're trying to do as part of the effort of a whole bunch of companies, including Fujifilm and Hysun Pharmaceuticals and Glenmark and now the Russian consortia. Everyone is trying to really ask the hard questions and run the hard trials. So I'm hopeful that we'll get answers to this.
I think that too raises some of the need for a kind of unprecedented level of cooperation at this point between different, private firms and things like that. What do you envision for the company as we face potentially many more months of this pandemic? What do you see as kind of the next steps?
So the company continues to do what we do, and we touched on that briefly, which is we have a pipeline going after a high unmet medical need. We don't see that stopping. We have a program to deal with cryptococcal meningitis, a terrible scourge in the world. We have a biodefense program with tularemia vaccine, a high priority target, 1,000 times more potent than anthrax. We have this Favipiravir program, and we have our sights on other programs as well that we just haven't disclosed yet. But they fit the same model as you talked about, leveraging those incentives and really moving things forward. I would argue that we will continue to do good and do well. Our shareholders and our company, we all sleep very well at night knowing we go after these really difficult problems. And I'm confident that we have lots of smart people. To your point, I'm also not an economist. And so my job is to continue to move the medicine and the science and the company forward. And in some ways, the hard part of figuring out how to make all of that work falls to some of the smart financial people on our team. And importantly, and you touched on this earlier, the public-private partnership. Governments really do need to step up, I think, and figure out this payer problem. How do we incentivize and appropriately reward companies for going after really difficult diseases? Infectious diseases are with us. They're not going away. And we need help. We need help from the public side to actually make this work. And so we're going to keep trying to address that in any way we can.
Right. And I mean, to your point, there is this problem we have where governments will pour money into the development of some of these therapeutics, but then once it's out on the market, it's kind of just left to, sometimes expensive drugs. I'm not saying that about a particular one you raised, but sometimes in ID, it's not a very it's not always a profitable field to treat, but it's also one of the biggest health burdens for the human species. And so, there has to be some balance there with some way to reward not just the development, but the distribution and continual production of these therapeutics.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And I think we've seen recent failures in the space of companies that have spent the time and spent the money on
Mid-size,
development.
exactly, that just got tanked. Yeah.
Absolutely. I won't bring up the names, we all know them. But certainly that was a shadow, if you will, over the entire space, and investors and even government folks recognize that there's a problem there. And so I'm confident that there are people out there addressing these problems, and I think there's certainly, it's understood, and I'll leave it to the economists to kind of figure out. I think the thing that we can do as a company is continue to go after these diseases, leverage those incentives. And I'll say one last issue about those incentives. The discussions about sunsetting some of the priority review vouchers or PRV programs is not helpful. I mean, I think, they are really, I know some people say that they're not really effective, but if you look across a portfolio like ours, we are counting on a couple of those potentially coming through to be able to help as part of an evergreen approach to our portfolio. It absolutely allows us to move other programs forward that might not be as attractive in the marketplace. And so I think we can tweak some of those programs to ensure that there isn't any company going offside and just not profiting and not doing all that work, as you said before, to distribute it. We can do that, but it's really not helpful to talk about pulling those away. It's a level of support that I think we need. This industry has a payer problem right now, and I think if we start to pull away the public support in the marketplace, we're going to run into problems like we have now, that people didn't see the incentive to push these drugs forward, like Favipiravir. It was an orphaned program until it showed effectiveness in COVID-19. And I would argue that remdesivir was similarly languishing before this. If the public parties don't step forward to try and help us figure out this problem, we are going to be in the same place, and you and I may have the same conversation 10 years from now with the next outbreak, unfortunately.
Sorry, I was muted. I hope that we can. I hope that we can see the politics of this kind of get put aside and stuff, because I mean it's definitely necessary. I'll just open the floor to you for my last question. Just, if there's anything else you think you want ID clinicians to know about the company, about the therapeutic, about the work you're doing, and any reflections you have, COVID-19 in general, pandemic response, future pandemic response. I'll just open the floor, like I said.
Sure. So I think for my ID colleagues out there, I think it's worth recognizing that a lot of work has gone into the development of Favipiravir. That in fact there are many. It's been exposed. A lot of patients have been exposed to this drug, and the safety profile is quite good. I think now the open question is, does this work, and can we demonstrate that it's effective when given early, as many of the antivirals are? And so I think as more trials are out there, it is really important for clinicians to help stop, as you said, the political nature of the discussion around drugs. It's not helpful. There's a difference between well-run randomized controlled trials and just giving a drug because you think it might work. They are engaged in the hard work of asking the tough questions and determining whether or not these products work in randomized controlled trials. And so I say, continue to have that discussion. It's an important one, and it will inform how we go after infectious diseases in the future. It informs the policy making and the ability of the public players to pay for what are very expensive trials, vice simply putting it out there under emergency use, which is an important component. But we must have randomized controlled trials to answer the question, so that we can be sure that we're giving drugs to as you said before, the right population, in the right place at the right time. And so I hope we're part of that solution.
All right. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. I really appreciate you coming on, and you're welcome back anytime. Contagion is happy to continue sharing the work you guys are doing.
Well, that's fantastic, and thanks for getting the word out. It's a critical part of what we do. If nobody knows that we're doing it, it's all for naught. And so I think it's an important component. So thank you.